listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. This is the show that talks about identity and access management and making sure you know who has access to what. Let's get started. Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm good. So I wanted to bring up the fact that you are going to become a vagabond here pretty soon. You're going to be homeless, probably one of the few homeless identity and access management consultants in the world. But I guess when you sell your home and you have no home to move into, that's kind of what you become, right?
Yeah, it's a very kind of a strange situation to be in. Let's kick down the fourth wall here later. And I think it's part of the reason why the schedule has been so weird for us and we've kind of limited on guests. And obviously I've started a new job, but I'm also trying to make it even more complicated by selling my house at the same time and moving across state lines. So yeah, I guess for folks who are listening, this will go live on Monday, which is, let me check the date and make sure I have the right one. It'll be the 9th, May 9th. And today we're recording this is May 4th because you're going to be out of the office. I'm going to be kind of out and about. But yeah, my house went on sale today and it's been on the market for like 6 hours and we already have an offer above market. That is absolutely how crazy the housing market is right now.
Yeah.
But I don't have any place to live yet in my destination. So it'll be a mad scramble here to figure out, okay, where we're going to end up and how we're going to work this out and, stuff like that. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting summer for sure for me.
You may wind up being on the giving end of those crazy offers here before long, but it just reminds me from a podcast perspective. One of the podcasts that I listened to a lot was a guy named Buster Olney has a Baseball Tonight podcast on ESPN, and he would do, I would really get into listening to it during spring training before the season got started because it was one of the few sources that kind of gave that behind the scenes look. And as he was recording, you'd hear birds chirping in the background. And I kind of picture that's what it's going to be like for you. Like, who knows where Jeff will be podcasting from?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like, I have all this gear. This is not exactly the most portable setup. So I've got to figure out if I'm going to have things in like storage or if I'm, recording from the car on a drive somewhere in some mountains or whatever it might look like. I've got to figure that stuff out. But, maybe I'll just add flavor, like, where am I coming to you from live for whatever episode we're having to do, but we'll keep it going. That's the plan. I think, our goal is to try to keep this thing going weekly like we usually do. And so far so good. So we'll see.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned is it is May the 4th. And I just heard something new, or it's probably been around for a long time, and I just became aware of it, which is May the 4th be with you.
Oh, Jimmy, come on. You haven't heard of this before? May the 4th be with you? Huge Star Wars holiday.
Yeah. Well, I knew about Cinco de Mayo. I'd heard of May Day, which is May 1st. But no, this is all new to me. May the 4th be with you, Jeff.
Well, thank you. And unto you as well. Yes. And I think we also got World Password Day, I think is tomorrow, the 5th, which in our last episode, I even titled it, I Hate Password Day. My general disdain of why that is. You'll have to go back and listen to episode 144 for that. But a whole bunch of nonsense holidays with the exception of Cinco de Mayo, which is, I think, pretty cool.
So we will get back to having real guests on the show at some point. I guess we don't consider ourselves real guests.
This is how we started. Let's not forget our roots.
Yeah, let's not forget our roots. Well, I think today we're kind of partially lobbying for a guest. This is a blog that I recently came across from a person named Phil Venables, and it's just a fantastic blog. So maybe we can get Phil on the show at some point.
Yeah, if you know Phil, we'd love to talk with him. He wrote a great article that Jim actually shared with me today. It's philvenables.com, and we'll have a link to the article we're going to talk about here in the show notes. According to LinkedIn, as we do our snooping, he's a vice president at Google, CISO for Google Cloud. So Phil, if you're listening or if you know Phil, pass on the note that we enjoy his work and his written thing that we're going to talk about today. And we'd love to kind of talk about more detail. But I guess that kind of spoils it because I was trying to think of like a fancy way or like a cryptic way to say, hey, we're going to talk politics today. And right. And immediately you say politics, like, oh my gosh, what is this going to be? Is it left, right? Is it something crazy? Whatever it may be.
It might get shut off before you get the words out of your mouth.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to talk politics, but in the context of an organization, which I think is one of the things that I appreciate the most about sort of the work that goes into running an IAM program and understanding, it's great to have ideas and think that you can solve every problem in the world. And, see a lot of folks who like come in with that idea and then they just get beaten down by the politics of an organization. It doesn't move quick enough, don't have the right buy-in, the right support, whatever it may be. Conversely, I've seen people who come in and they do a good job of that and they get things done. Like it or not, it's just the way the world and most organizations work, because there's a political element to getting things done with it, and you have to understand how to navigate around that. So, Jim, you sent me this article so to let you kind of MC the conversation, but that's kind of where I think we're going to take things.
Yeah, so it's interesting because where I wanted to start this was, you know, I one thing that always sticks out in my head when it comes to organizational politics in terms of what we do consulting to organizations is how do you introduce this to the folks that you're talking to without turning them sour, without, offending them? Hey, you guys have a political problem, right? I had a VP who I reported to at one point in my career who said, never put politics in a slide because you don't want to tell people that part of their problem is that they play politics, right? So we're going to try to ignore that fact. But I think the reality of it is like, this is very much part of real life. And I know that you really fell in love with one quote. I think it was on a slide that I remember we've used a bunch of times from Forrester. And I don't want to, I know I had the politics in it, but I don't know. Do you remember the exact quote?
Yeah, it was something like IAM programs are, 30% people, process, and politics. I'm sorry, 70% people, process, and politics, and only really 30% technology. So the reason I like that quote and I like to use it a lot is because it's one of the few quotes that I actually see that, one, deals with specifically with identity and access management, and then two, politics. It's specifically called out. I don't feel like burying your head in the sand and trying to ignore that it's not an element at an organization serves any positive purpose. If it is a challenge, you got to hit it head on and really start to figure out how are you going to navigate around it. Doesn't mean that you solve the problem of politics, but very much like a Littlefinger, you have to know how to play the game of Thrones. Otherwise, you may run into challenges to actually get your objective done. So that's a quote. It's from Forrester. I don't know where or when it came from, but certainly want to make sure that the proper attribution gets in place before the Forrester legal team comes after us.
Yeah, we can always throw it in the show notes. So,
Yeah.
I my feeling on the whole topic of politics, though, Phil's writing from the perspective of a CISO. I think the IAM program manager sits on his own like smaller throne, so it might be you're not the king, but you're a lord of one little area. But you kind of have to operate with that same mentality if you want to kind of show, hey, I'm capable of running a program. So as the program director, the program manager, it's about getting things done through other people, building that base of support. There's specifically an area in Phil's blog that talks about building a base of support. But kind of my mind harkens to the idea of, okay, when we talk about the IAM program, we usually talk about having a steering committee, and the people who sit on that committee are the people who you need support from. You need to make sure you're communicating to them, what the strategy is, what's going on with the program, and getting their feedback. But ultimately, you want those people out there kind of evangelizing for the program, talking about how important it is for everybody to get on board with what the program is driving.
Yeah, you got to have the buy-in, you got to have the support. And I think one thing that sometimes gets lost in this formalization of IAM and having steering committees is how does decision making actually work? Because we talk, okay, well, steering committee is going to receive a list of things and proposals and ideas, and then they will decide during this meeting that here's the process or the path that we're going to follow forward. I don't think that's the way it works in the real world. Really, it's usually more of a formality by the time I hope it's usually more of a formality by the time you get the steering committee, because you should have already, at least at that part, started to socialize and gain support and you know, basically build consensus before you get to that state. Um, Otherwise, you're going to have a tough time, I think, trying to do that all within the constraints of a 1 hour meeting every week or 2 weeks or quarter or whatever it looks like, right, from a cadence perspective. So I think about that support aspect of making sure that you're not going into that committee blind and that you haven't already had discussions and you kind of have a gauge and a temperature of where things are at. Jim, I'm sure you've kind of run across this in the past with some of the work that you've done. I certainly have as well. There may be times you walk into a steering committee meeting and not everyone is on the same page, but maybe one person is or two people are, and you have allies that you can then kind of go to battle against. It's part of a conversation maybe or whatever that looks like. Is that something that you've kind of encountered in your travels?
Well, for sure. And, I think that this is the part of the blog that we're talking about right now is that decisions are not made in committees. This is really, I think, the underlying tone of this whole blog, which I just really feel like I understood this blog. I really got it. It really spoke to me because it talked about, it's not just that meeting, it's everything that you're doing holistically to build buy-in, build support, and not just to build support like, hey, I'm out there selling my book of business, but empathizing with people, making sure that you're understanding what they need so that you can help kind of serve their interests. And then also realizing that, it's kind of this self-awareness angle as well. So let me kind of like ground that with an example. So if on your committee, you've got like a VP level person from your human resources group. I think what's important to understand is that they're going to have people who help formulate their opinions. They're going to have their lieutenants. They're going to have people that, um, are very influential toward them. So, kind of keying in and working with those folks and making sure that you build those alliances with the folks who influence the kind of the key decision makers who are going to be part of your committee is two angles. It's one is, getting those people on board with your vision so they understand it, so they support it. It's of course making sure that you're hearing from them, right? It's not just you pushing to them, but you taking from them, getting an understanding of what they need and feeding that to them. And that will make it back to your key decision makers so that when they come to the committee, then it's more about kind of like formalizing those decisions that you need to have made.
Always be nice to admins. They're the ones that are they're talking to everybody. Make sure that you have support, from that group for sure if you're going to go into a conversation.
Admins for sure. Um,
Like administrative assistant type folks, not
Administrative
admins.
assistants
Yeah,
for
just make
sure.
sure we're clear. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think you kind of come away from this article with be nice to everybody. This is not like a Simple Simon blog article, right? He's talking about it in kind of a sophisticated way. But there are those kind of like, um, everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten kind of stuff, the golden rule. Um, One other item which I found to be interesting was a section called slipstream constantly. Slipstream constantly. So the idea was that, it's very tough to say, I'm going to try to get funding for a big enterprise initiative and it's going to solve all the world's problems, but it's going to cost $1 million. Compare and contrast that with we have one particular business problem and it can be the starting point where I get seed funding for something that eventually will solve the world's problems, but in the short term, it's just going to solve this one problem that I have. It's an interesting way to go about, you know, I think especially for, an area where, it's not very mature in terms of kind of a identity or a technology area like identity governance or single sign-on, where I think that's a well paved road. But if you need to do something like cloud entitlement, a cloud infrastructure entitlements management, or user behavior analytics, if you can solve one particular problem, you might be able to get enough funding to get something set up and start to show value.
Yeah, I think the area that immediately jumps out to me is I see a lot of IAM initiatives tacking themselves onto things like digital transformation or an ERP upgrade or human capital management upgrade or whatever that looks like. It's sometimes easier to get funding and buy-in if you can tie yourself to something else that is strategic within the environment or whatever the organization is trying to do. So those are the ones that immediately kind of jump out to me. It's kind of like, okay, well, we're already kind of fixing the customer experience. That means that we're going to be able to maybe invest in a stronger authentication platform. Or we know that the HR platform is going to be upgraded from X to Y. And as a result of that, we think we're going to have better data. And oh, by the way, if we had this little bit of extra funding, we could automate onboarding or offboarding based on sort of a connection back to that new system. So I think there's plenty of opportunity to kind of figure out how do you align the IAM program and the whatever the objectives are of that program to try and align it strategically with other things that are going out the organization, and try to play it that way for sure.
Yeah, I also think you made me think about another area that was kind of discussed in the blog. I'm not sure exactly where, but it was about leveraging others and realizing, kind of where your strengths lie and where you can tap into other people. So maybe you're not the most technical person. That's where you really need to start building those alliances with folks who are more technical and can help you from that perspective. You may not have kind of that business system background. You've got a real good understanding of, maybe you came from background of as a developer or a network person or on the customer support side even, but maybe you don't understand accounting systems. So start to build those alliances with folks who can, kind of complement. And, when I say building the alliances, like, you know, really work hand in hand in terms of trying to help that person in hopes that they'll turn around and help you as well. And then, kind of finally where things go with this blog article, and this I think could kind of wrap it up a little bit, is around what can we be doing to kind of build ourselves to become better. Because I think regardless of where you are in your career, whether you're early in your career, middle career, or even at the end, it's, starting to continuing to develop your skills, getting better. I think it doesn't take long for you to say, all right, I'm done learning, before you're completely useless. And, once you say you're done learning, I think it's, probably 2 years before nobody even wants you to work for them anymore. So, um, one of the areas they talked about was knowledge mastery and confidence. I think this, had a lot to do with, you know, building domain expertise. And I think that's one thing that we've always emphasized, right? When we're talking about the IAM program manager or the IAM practitioner, is that you don't have to be an expert in everything. But I don't think you should look at that and say, well, I don't need to be an expert in anything, or I don't need to eventually start to build that expertise. I think that you probably, the way I would look at it is like you're going to get a pass for a while, but if you continue on in that role and you never sharpen the saw, you never start to understand your domain well, um, people are going to get tired of that pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, no kidding. And I think just a general with them, if you know your stuff, it helps in so many other ways, confidence, speaking engagements, presenting, etc. Like that's usually like the first thing when someone comes to me and says, okay, I need to give this presentation, or I'm kind of, helping along those lines. Okay. My first recommendation is like, do you know your content? Because if you can speak from a place of confidence and knowledge and fact, then you've got at least the foundation kind of build on from that presentation standpoint of things. I think the same thing goes when it comes to identity and access management. Nobody knows everything. You can have the best identity person in the world. They do not know everything. And this is where you lean on good teams, good relationships to augment those weaknesses and to highlight the strengths of individuals on the team. I'm not afraid to bring in somebody and say, hey, we're working on something, but this isn't my expertise. Let me bring in somebody who knows, I don't know, Kubernetes, containers and DevSecOps and things like that. Like that's not my jam, but I know somebody who does. Let's have the conversation and, not be afraid to say, I don't know that, but introduce someone else to the conversation. I think having that vulnerability or showing it is a big part of knowing what you know and being able to demonstrate that mastery over the knowledge. And, sometimes it's things that you only get over the years, and, it takes a while to kind of build it up, and things constantly changing. You can't just let your knowledge kind of die on the vine. I know some days, Jim probably feels the things like my brain is absolutely full. I am not able to learn anything new, and I need to clear some things from my RAM and put them into my hard drive or archive it somewhere. So it could be a challenge. I think that's kind of the fun thing too about identity. If you'd said, okay, in the early 2000s, there's going to be this idea of like a decentralized identity system. And what do you mean nobody owns it? And what do you mean the user can actually decide, what they do with their data? Like, you're crazy, man. Like that's never going to happen. And yet here we are. Things like blockchain and similar types of technologies are out there. You've got to keep pace with it. And, doesn't mean you need to be an expert in it, but I think the best IAM program managers know enough to be dangerous on a lot of subjects.
I agree. The last part of this blog, this will kind of take us out on this is, developing influencing skills. I'm gonna pick on a few things here, and I want to get your ideas in terms of how you go about these things. So, one is I think about creativity. And I'm wondering for you, when you need to be creative, so you're building a presentation or um, trying to come up with a strategy and you're staring at a blank piece of paper. What are you do? How do you go about that? Do you open up PowerPoint, start building slides? Do you take paper and pencil and start drawing diagrams, or go into Lucidchart, or what do you do?
It's definitely digital. I don't have a pen or paper anywhere on my desk. I am purely typing. I'm a very visual kind of thinker. So I might just start with a blank canvas, whether it's PowerPoint or Lucidchart or whatever I happen to be using, and start to think about, okay, what is the idea that I'm trying to get across? Is it the strategy? Is it the story? If I can relate it to something in the real world, or if I can use something in pop culture that makes it easier to understand, I'm happy to do that, because I think it's easier to tell a story and to be more visual with it. I'm more of a, less words on a page, and talk about the issues and try to relate it specifically to things that I picked up in a conversation with so and so, whoever that person is. Like, hey, you know what? We were talking, and maybe it's a healthcare thing, and we're talking with one of the nurses, and she said, here's her problem. Like, if we could just fix this one thing, she would be so much happier with what she could do. And, you don't have to use a person's name, maybe if they,
Or
if
if
they
you
give you
do, it's
clearance, or
great.
yeah, if they're cool, it's like, hey, do you mind if I tell your story to others? Things like that. I think it's really just about making it real. The visual stuff helps, I think, depending on whatever the medium is. It could be a PowerPoint, it could be a Word doc, it could be an email, right? I mean, you've got to be able to figure out what's the best method to convey that. I think a lot of times people get stuck in this corporate structure of, well, there's a PowerPoint and it must be 6 slides, and the first slide has to be a title slide, and there needs to be, an appendix at the end that has a whole bunch of supplementary information. You know, read the audience. figure out, be clear what you're trying to, communicate. Make it simple. The
Yeah.
harder it is for people to understand, the harder it's going to be for you to get buy-in. You've got to simplify it.
Yeah. I think those are great points. You know me, I'm more of a paper and pencil kind of
Oh, I
guy.
know.
I think the main reason is, well, there's two reasons. One is sitting in front of a computer screen, there's too many distractions. And second off, I'm just not quick enough with the input devices and nimble enough. I've actually found that Lucidchart sometimes I can be nimble enough. I can just drag things in, type, and it's very quick to format things. And I love Lucidchart. I
We're not
found
sponsored by Lucidchart, but if Lucidchart is listening and wants to sponsor us, reach out.
um, I, PowerPoint not so much. So paper and pencil gets me away from the computer, and that I find that I don't write as clearly as I once did. As you can attest, even 5 years ago, it was not very good.
Yeah,
As
doctor's handwriting, Jim.
I make I make most doctors' handwriting look legible. The other thing that I'm going to say is that I drink a lot of coffee before going in and trying to be creative. It lights up my neurons or whatever and helps me really think. So those are my two things. The other thing is like when I get further along, so this, jumping to the next point in this developing influencing skills. Because I think the next idea is that now that you've got this creative ideas and you put it down on paper, and now you're going to go in front of people and try to explain to them what you're trying to say. It's like when I practice, sometimes I just practice and blah, 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 blah. And I'll ask myself, all right, what am I trying to say? And it's like, if you can't say it in a sentence or two, then it's probably too complicated. Or you should be able to boil it down into a sentence or two and then kind of go off in an explanation, but then be able to pull it back to a sentence or two. Like you can't overcomplicate. It can't be too complicated. You got to be able to take that complex idea and simplify it. If you can't do that, then you're going to lose people.
Simplification. I love it. I mean, it sounds so simple, but I think that's where the skill comes in, is how do you make something complex sound so easy and so simple to understand that the complexity doesn't go away, but it comes secondary to getting things done. Because immediately the first thing is, oh my gosh, how the heck are we going to do that? We have like 8,000 users and 40,000 roles and poor data going in. It'll never be clean. Okay, I get it. It's a lot of work, but you don't eat the elephant all at once. You eat it one bite at a time. You pick apart. How do you make it, realistic to achieve? Maybe a journey. It might be several year journey to kind of get where you want to go. But yeah, I mean, keep it simple and use the tools that you are comfortable with. Jim likes pen and paper. I like to put my headphones on, crank the knife party, and just open up a blank PowerPoint with a bunch of stuff. I think, work in the environment that you're comfortable with, and things will start to flow a little more naturally, I think.
Ask you a question. So because I think this is the true sign of intelligence, being able to take something complex and explain it in a way that's simple so other people can understand it on whatever level they are, in terms of that subject that you're trying to explain to them. So if somebody tried to explain to you how a rocket ship works, they'd have to do it very simply, right? But if they tried to explain to you how a laptop works, right, they could do it at a more complex level. But it's finding that right level. So to me, that's the true sign of intelligence. Somebody who can do that. So long route to the question I wanted to ask you was, how do you feel about when somebody comes on and says, I'm going to turn this over to the smart people now. Now the smart people are going to explain it. And really, it almost comes off as like they don't think they're the smart people. That saying bothers me, man. I've never liked it.
Yeah, I think intelligence can be measured in so many ways that it's difficult for me to, what is a smart person? I mean, is it book smart? Is it street smart? Is it you know how to play the game of politics? This conversation. Is it you know how to play a guitar? I think a person who can do anything music related, play an instrument, is a genius because I cannot figure out how to do it. What do I know how to do? I know how to play with toys, from a technology standpoint. I know how to, run a podcast. I know how to run an IAM program. I know identity, but geniuses to me are people who are doing things that I cannot figure out myself how to do, or I haven't invested the time to do it. I guess I don't necessarily, I think it's a recognition of like, I don't know everything. I'm going to let, the people speak that can articulate it to the detail or the level maybe of certain people in the audience. But, that turning it over and letting the smart people talk, I kind of get where you're going with it. I guess I have less of a concern around it as long as I understand sort of the, what is the reasoning behind it or what is the motivation.
Yeah. Yeah, pet peeve for me, but I think you're right. It really depends on what the motivation is. Absolutely. Speaking of motivation, I spent $1,600 on an office chair today.
You're crazy, man.
It's one of the craziest things I've done in a long time. But my back's really been bothering me, and I told one of my colleagues about it, and he told me, you know, I've got the answer for you. You need to buy this Herman Miller chair. I was at the point where I could barely walk or whatever, and I got this chair and it fixed my back. Thinking, man, you know, when you broke it down, like they took that $1,600 and zero interest over 12 months, it was like $120 a month, and that broke down to like $30 a week, and I don't know, it's like $8 a day, $1 an hour. It seemed to me to be worth it, but I don't know. We'll see if it's worth it. But it got me wondering, what is it that you think is worth spending money on to have the best of the best of?
It's an excellent question. I love this to kind of wrap up our show here. First of all, you've spent a lot of money on a chair, but you refuse to get your keyboard fixed on your computer, which I think is absolutely hilarious with some of the issues with your typing that I've seen in some of your emails. I was going to throw that out there. I actually agree with your purchase, and here's why. I feel like if I'm going to invest in something that connects me to the world, it is worth the money. So what are the things I'm thinking about? Like the chair you sit in for 8, 10, 12 hours a day, the bed you sleep in, the shoes you wear, your body, your, glasses, hearing, things like that. I used to wear glasses. I got LASIK done a few years ago. I wish I had done it sooner. Like things like that connect me as a person to the world. Absolutely think it's worth it. I'm a fan of technology and toys and the computers and stuff like that. A good cell phone to me is invaluable. With that, I don't think it's invaluable for everybody. So I'm going to say, things that connect me to the world. I would spend money on a chair. I would spend money on a bed, shoes, and health things to keep me healthy, or at least to improve the quality of, my life. I think the other stuff I could probably get rid of, or at least I could go without. Oh, and high-speed internet. I will absolutely pay for high-speed internet.
Let me ask you a question. If you're going to a concert, where would you sit? What level of ticket is it worth buying? You just want to be there and you'll pay $40 and sit in the rafters. You pay $200 to sit in okay seats, or you'll pay $800 to be in the first two rows.
I think it's such a subjective question. If you had asked me when I was younger, it would have been just happy to be there. In the mosh pit, my first concert, watching the Offspring in the Aragon Brawl Room, downtown Chicago. In the mosh pit, watching that, it was the best thing that ever happened in my entire life at that point. Wouldn't have traded it for the world. Still wouldn't. It was a fantastic experience. Now I'm older. I much rather sit up in a skybox, food, drink, enjoy the show versus trying to be part of the experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. I'm willing to pay for good seats. I don't want to sit in the rafters. The rafters don't do it for me anymore. I'd rather watch it on TV. Um, but I do have a threshold for pain. Like I wouldn't pay $1,000 to be down in the front for very many experiences. The
Right.
experiences where I'd want to sit, I'd pay big time to sit in the front. It's not going to be $1,000 either. It would be like a World Series game. Okay, for a World Series game, am I going to pay $15,000 to sit in the front row? Heck no. It's just, I mean, if I was a billionaire, absolutely. But no.
I mean, we're not billionaires doing those podcasts. You're really kind of hurting our image here, man.
we're waiting for that Lucid Chart sponsorship.
Yeah, when that Lucid Chart money starts rolling in, then we'll start spending it. I think of things like that, like once in a lifetime experiences. Going to the World Series, going to the Super Bowl. I was fortunate enough to go have dinner at the French Laundry in California, and for people who know, that is a very expensive proposition, especially for a group of 4. But it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, once in a lifetime thing. And am I glad I went? Yes. Did my wallet hurt afterwards? Absolutely. But I wouldn't trade it because I think the experience was totally worth it. Some things I don't necessarily care about, like going to a sport, going to a baseball game, I could care less. One, I don't really care about baseball to begin with, unless it was like the Cubs are in the World Series. Like, okay, yeah, I would go for, to check that out. Like that would be different. So,
hey, in like 90 years, if you're still alive,
when we're due again, yep,
they'll be due. They'll put out the money and get there.
Oh yeah, we're still trading on the World Series win from a few years ago, so there's plenty of runway left to celebrate the last Cubs World Series.
That was what, 2016?
I don't even remember at this point. Yeah, it was a while back. It feels like it was just yesterday. It was such a huge thing for the city of Chicago, especially for Cubs fans who have been, the lovable losers for so long. But
for like
we'll trade on that one for another 100 years. Hopefully, it won't be that one, but. Yeah, I saw it. I can say I saw it in my lifetime. There are people who lived and died and never saw a Cubs World Series.
Yeah. Well, Jeff, good luck with selling the house. Good luck with the move, and we'll find a way to do it again next week.
Yeah, somehow, somewhere, we'll figure it out. We'll go ahead and wrap it up for this week. Again, live streams are on hold until I get my life figured out. So to speak. We'll keep doing the podcasts. You can visit us on the web, idacpodcast.com. We're on Twitter at idacpodcasts. And, on behalf of 0 sponsors, we'll go ahead and leave it there for this week. Thanks, Jim, for your time. And thank you all for listening. And we'll talk with everyone in the next one. Thanks for listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe and visit us on the web at identityatthecenter.com.